In the heart of Atlanta, beneath the marble halls of justice, one woman walked into a courthouse expecting to serve, only to be humiliated for simply being herself. But what began as a quiet act of discrimination would spark a powerful reckoning no one saw coming. This isn't just a story about one veteran. It's about dignity, power, and the moment silence turned into strength. The morning sun beat down on downtown Atlanta, heavy with summer heat, pressing on every surface like a weight. Inside the Fulton County Courthouse, the air conditioning barely held back the warmth. It was the kind of day that made people short-tempered. But for Ava Johnson, it wasn't the heat that made her shoulders tense. It was something else, something unspoken but unmistakable. She stood at the security checkpoint, summons in one hand, veteran ID clipped to her bag. Her locks were pulled back tightly, neat and professional. She'd worn the same hairstyle while leading a convoy through Basra. It never once got in the way of doing her duty. Today, she was there for jury service. Civic responsibility, nothing more, nothing less. The bailiff on duty, Dean Crawford, looked up as she approached. His gaze lingered not on her face, not on her ID, but on her hair. She felt it instantly. That weight. It wasn't curiosity. It was judgment. "Ma'am," he said, not unkindly, but not kindly either. "There's a decorum standard here. Hair needs to be tidy and professional. That," he motioned toward her head, "isn't court appropriate." Ava blinked. "Excuse me. You'll need to do something about it before I can let you in." Ava felt the familiar burn rise in her chest. Years in uniform had taught her how to pick her battles. But this was not a misunderstanding. It was an assertion of power, plain and ugly. "My hair is neat. Well, it's how I've worn it while commanding soldiers. I'm not here to cause trouble." Dean didn't move. His arms folded across his chest like a gate that refused to open. "Then you'll have to wait in the holding room while we sort this out." Without raising her voice, without showing the storm that stirred behind her calm, Ava followed him. He led her into a small room with no windows, just concrete and silence. He pulled a pair of clippers from a drawer like they were an everyday tool. "You want to serve today? This is the way." Her hands shook slightly as she sat. She could have walked out, could have raised hell, but something in her refused to let this man win. Not like this. So she let him cut. Each pass of the clippers felt like a betrayal. But Ava stared at the wall and refused to flinch. This wasn't defeat, it was survival. She re-entered the courtroom, bald, silent, and proud. The people inside barely looked at her. To them, she was just another juror. Until the judge walked in. "All rise." And there she was, Judge Carmen Brooks. Tall, regal, her natural curls as full and bold as her presence. Ava's breath caught. That face, that walk, she remembered it from another life, another uniform, another war. Judge Brooks scanned the room. Her eyes landed on Ava and paused. Something shifted. "We'll begin with preliminary proceedings," the judge said, voice steady. But as she flipped through her docket, she glanced back. Then she stopped. "I'd like to address something before we proceed," she said, her voice cutting clean through the courtroom noise. "There is a juror present today who I had the honor of serving beside in Iraq. Sergeant Ava Johnson, 2 deployments, Bronze Star, one of the finest soldiers I've ever known." Heads turned, some startled, some curious. "And today," the judge continued, her voice rising, "she was forced to shave her hair she has worn for over a decade in both civilian life and military service just to enter this courthouse." The silence that followed was suffocating. Bailiff Crawford stood still, eyes fixed on the floor. "Mr. Crawford," Judge Brooks said, "approach the bench." His feet moved slowly, like they were carrying more than just his body. When he reached her, she didn't raise her voice. "You didn't enforce rules. You enforced your bias." "I thought," he started, "there is no regulation against natural hairstyles in this court. But there are very clear rules against discrimination." Dean opened his mouth, but no words came out. "You're dismissed from duty pending investigation," she said simply. He turned and walked out, shoulders sunken. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd pushed too far on the wrong day. Judge Brooks looked back at Ava. For a long moment, nothing passed between them but shared history, dust, noise, fear, loyalty. Ava nodded. Carmen nodded back. Court resumed, but the tone had changed. A quiet intensity settled over the room. Ava stayed silent, her presence louder than words. The story moved quickly. Crawford placed on administrative leave. Security footage reviewed. A complaint filed. But something else began to ripple outward. The young intern who had looked away earlier now held the door open for Ava with both hands. The court reporter whispered thank you as she passed by. Even other bailiffs began to avoid Ava's gaze, not out of shame, but out of reflection. 1 week later, Ava received a handwritten note. "Some battles are fought with guns, some with silence. Yours was the latter, and it shook this place. Judge Carmen Brooks." She pinned the letter to her fridge, right next to her discharge papers. It reminded her that dignity didn't always shout. Sometimes, it just stood its ground. 2 months passed. Ava was invited to speak at a law school symposium, Diversity and Civic Service. She hesitated, but agreed. In a packed auditorium, she stood behind the podium and shared what happened not with bitterness, but with clarity. "I didn't fight back with anger. I stayed in the room. I stayed in the chair. And sometimes, that's enough." After the talk, a student approached her. "You ever think about becoming a lawyer?" Ava smiled. "I never thought I had to. But maybe I do." Outside, the air was warm again, but it felt different now. Ava walked down the steps of the courthouse, bald, proud, and unbothered. She wasn't invisible anymore, and maybe she never had been. She passed a group of courthouse staff on her way out. One of them nodded. Just a small nod. But this time, Ava nodded back, because sometimes, justice doesn't come crashing in. Sometimes, it whispers through the cracks you make by simply standing still. And that's enough to change everything.